Let's explain the difference between a porterhouse and a T-bone. To make it simple, we're going to take a steak off each side of this short loin. Right now, you are looking at the porterhouse side of a short loin, and if you flip it around, you'll see the T-bone side of a short loin. They are both bone-in New York strips, but the porterhouse has a tenderloin, and the T-bone does not. The tenderloin gets smaller and smaller with each porterhouse cut as it transitions from a porterhouse to a T-bone. Although the porterhouse does have a fillet attached, it is lined up with an end-cut strip. So the New York strip on a T-bone will consistently be better quality. We started with the bone-in ribeye that we've been aging for 40 days in our dry age cooler. Right now we're trimming off the outside pellicle, first by removing the edges of the bones that are exposed, and then we faced off each side of the loin. From here, we cut these into 1¼ inch thick steaks. We then used our bone scraper to remove any bone dust, and then we hand trimmed each one to remove any remaining pellicle that's still there. That's that discoloration on the outside edge. But we're not done, we're going to cold smoke these. These are going to be cold smoked with fresh rosemary as well as maplewood chips. You've probably heard of cold smoked cheeses or salmon, but our personal favorite are cold smoked steaks. We light the contents of the smoke box on fire, then it gets put below where there's an iced heat barrier that separates the meat and the smoke. The smoke passes through that heat barrier and fills the chamber with room temperature smoke. The steaks stay in there for 1 hour, and what you are left with is a super smoky finished product that's still completely raw. Cook this any way you want and get an awesome smoky flavor. That's why many of our customers call this a bacon-flavored steak. Let me show you how we break down our Japanese Wagyu ribeyes. This may look a little odd. These are typically cut so thin because the face is so large. A 3/4 inch thick steak usually weighs about 16 ounces. So you'll notice here we're actually going to turn this and cut it straight down the middle. Check this out. Now from here, we'll lay these down and cut them into individual steaks. These half face size portions have become super popular in the shop. We do this with about half the ribeyes that come in. At this point, you can also cut a thicker steak for the customer as well, and it won't be too crazy as a final weight. Adding that extra step adds a lot of variety to the sizes we have available. These are on the site right now. Have a look at the size difference of this BMS 12 Japanese Wagyu ribeye and this prime Angus ribeye. Which one are you taking home? This product blew my mind, and I know it's something you haven't seen before. This is orange-fed Wagyu beef. Over 25% of this beef's finishing diet comes from orange citrus pulp. There are surprisingly a crazy amount of benefits to this. This diet triples the amount of lipophilic antioxidants found in the meat. These are super important in brain health, and to put simply, this meat is protected from lipid fat oxidation, which means it actually increases the shelf life. I would have never guessed that was possible. This feed is also super sustainable. Orange pulp is typically a byproduct of the juice industry, so being able to find a use for it is crucial to help reduce food waste, as well as reducing the amount of grains needed in the finishing diet. As if that wasn't enough, it's also known to have higher levels of healthy monosaturated fats compared to a traditional grain-finished Wagyu product. Now you can't tell me that that isn't impressive. Who would have thought that oranges would make that big of a difference? We have a limited supply of these available right now. Have you ever seen one of these? This is a full beef leg. This is called a steamship round, and it weighs 80 pounds. This was the go-to cut on steamships. This would be prepared by slow roasting it whole, and then it would be served banquet style. Today we're going to take this and cut them into some of the biggest steaks that you have ever seen. This steak may look familiar to you. This was the old 96er cut in the movie The Great Outdoors. It's also called the Flintstones cut. This is about 20 inches long and weighs over 9 pounds. Have a look at all the different cuts that are present on this steak. This was a special order for our friend Chef Kuso. Here are some tips when breaking down a picanha. This one's an Australian Wagyu from Stone Axe. It's marble score 8-9+. So there's a little bit of silver skin that goes about halfway down the loin on a picanha. On the other side is a fat cap. This is something you may not have heard before, but when you're cutting picanha into thick steaks, you actually want to cut with the grain. The reason for this is once they are cooked and on your plate, you're going to be cutting your final cut against the grain. This will result in much shorter muscle fibers than if we were to cut them against the grain right now. Shorter muscle fibers on the final cut means more tenderness for you. Let's break down this rib section into cuts that you may see on a restaurant menu. The rib section of beef is composed of ribs 6 through 12. We're going to cut right between the ribs, creating our first cut. This is called a tomahawk steak. It's a ribeye with the full rib attached. Now we're going to walk over to the bandsaw and cut our next cut. This is called a cowboy steak. It's just a shorter bone version of the tomahawk steak. Now we can cut that bone even smaller and create what's called a bone-in ribeye. Now we can take this back to the bench, debone it just by removing that rib bone on the bottom, and you are left with what is called a boneless ribeye. And you'll typically see them trimmed more like this. There you go. I hope you learned something. Start by splitting that bone canoe style. We're gonna take this USDA prime strip and we're gonna score it on all sides. This is gonna increase the surface area and give us a really thick crust. To prep the marrow bones, you're gonna wanna let them soak in your fridge in water for at least 2 hours. Now we're gonna prep these 2 ways. The first, we're doing olive oil, salt, and pepper, and the second, I'm doing vanilla extract and smoked whiskey sugar. These go indirect on the grill for the entire cook. Combine all of these chopped ingredients together for the chimichurri and put that aside. For the steak, we're going to season it on all sides using our house rub. You can also just use salt, pepper, and garlic powder. Throw that on a super hot preheated grill. While that's cooking, let's season up some slices of sourdough. With the steak being so thick, we have a nice sear on both sides. We're gonna finish this on the top rack to an internal temp of 115. The steak is ready to rest. It's time to take the salt and pepper seasoned bone marrow and add that into our chimichurri. Let's cut into this steak. This thing came out perfect. Let's make that creme brulee marrow bone. Add white sugar to the top of this, torch it off. This was so good. If garlic bread and steak had a baby, you'd end up with these bad boys, garlic-infused ribeyes. Start with beef tallow, garlic, and lemon juice. Get it in a food processor. Mince down the garlic and then slowly add the beef tallow until you have a texture like this here. Now we're going to roll out pinwheel an entire boneless prime ribeye. Then cover it in paper and completely pound that out nice and flat. Now it's time to add that beef tallow and garlic mixture. And then we're gonna roll this thing back up. From here, we're going to tie this up and vacuum seal it for 3 days in our cooler. 3 days have passed, let's cut into this. Could not be happier with how these look, and you know we're cooking one up, you've gotta see this thing finished off. Just a tiny bit of oil in the pan, the beef tallow renders out of the spiral. This thing was so good. If you love garlic, you would freak out eating this. You need to try this recipe. This is a 123B beef plate rib. That's a Texas style 3-bone beef rib. And have a look at how these came out. That's just crazy. Let me show you how we got here. We're starting with 2 racks of beef plate ribs. They're 3 bones and there's a membrane on the back side of the rib that you have to remove. For this recipe, we're using sriracha as a binder. We're going to coat both sides fully and then rub it down with our house rub, but you can also just use salt, pepper, and garlic powder. Get these on your smoker at 225 degrees and bring them all the way up to an internal temp of 175 degrees. Once they hit 175, we're gonna do a mixture of beef stock and hard apple cider and start spraying these down every half hour or so until they get to an internal temp of 205. Unlike brisket, we kept these unwrapped the entire time. This took 10 hours to smoke. Now they're gonna be wrapped on my counter to rest for 2 hours. This was the most successful smoke of the season for sure. The sriracha gave a kick, it wasn't too strong of a flavor, and these things fell apart. They still held their shape. Look at cutting into this. What you were left with is a ton of meat, some bare bones. Finish this on some cheddar mac and cheese. Please, please, please give these a shot. We're calling these poor man's boneless pork ribs. Baby back ribs have gotten a lot more expensive than they used to be, so we took this boneless pork butt, which is only about half the price of baby back ribs. We butterflied it all the way open, cut it down the middle, and what you were left with are 2 pieces that look just like a baby back rib. Let's get these home and smoke them up. Cover them with yellow mustard and then put your favorite dry rub on them. We're going to do the 3-2-1 method. Start with an uncovered smoke at 185 degrees for 3 hours. Then we're going to wrap them in foil and cover them with butter, honey, and maple syrup. These are going on the smoker now for 2 hours at 225 degrees. After those 2 hours, we're going to pull them off. I'm gonna save that liquid, mix it with barbecue sauce, and put them directly on the smoker racks now at 225 degrees for 1 more hour. Here's the final result. They look just like ribs. Let's turn this into a boneless rib sandwich. Toast the bread, hit it with barbecue sauce, throw the ribs on there. I made an apple coleslaw, more sauce. Look at this thing. This was one of my favorite things I've cooked all year. I love these, I will do them again. You can also serve them just like boneless ribs. Let's chop these up. This was so good.